At first, the experiment was uneventful. The teacher delivered the smaller shocks and the shock generator whenever the learner made an error. However, as the shocks increased in intensity, many of the teachers became very uncomfortable and unsure about continuing. When the teachers expressed to Milgram that they didn't want to continue, Milgram would tell the teacher that the experiment must continue. You must continue with the experiment. So every time the teacher tried to ask Milgram to stop, he told them that they were unable to do so and they needed to continue delivering the shocks. While the teacher was administering the shocks, he heard some pre-programmed responses from the learner. For example, at 90 volts, the learner would yell, "Ugh!" And it's at these times when the teacher became uncomfortable and would tell Milgram, "I want to stop." And recall, Milgram would say, "You must continue, the experiment must go on." At 150 volts, the teacher would hear the learner yell, "Get me out of here! My heart's starting to bother me. I refuse to go on. Let me out." Here again, the teacher would become uncomfortable and tell Milgram that he wanted to stop. In each instance, Milgram reminded the person that he had to continue with the experiment and that he could not leave. Finally, when the volts went past 330, the teacher would hear no response from the learner at all, and this implied that the learner was either unconscious or worse. Remember when Milgram asked those experts how many people would go up to 450 volts? Well, they were very wrong. In fact, in his results, he found that 65% of the participants went all the way to 450 volts. Also, there were no differences in the sexes, meaning men and women were equally likely to go all the way up to 450 volts. Interestingly, adding the yelling of the learner at 150 volts, where he yelled, "Let me out of here, I don't want to continue," did decrease obedience from 100% down to 83%. It's important to point out that the participants were debriefed and told after the study what the study was actually about, and they were reunited, the teacher and the learner, and the teacher could see that the learner was actually never harmed. Milgram conducted a series of studies in this area and changed some of the variables. For example, he changed the attire of the researcher. It turns out that people were more likely to obey when the researcher was wearing a white lab coat than when the researcher was more casually dressed, like here. In one experiment, he changed the proximity of the teacher and the learner and removed the barrier so they could see each other. In these situations, the teacher was much less likely to go all the way to 450 volts. These are called systematic replications of the original research study. So it turns out there are many variables that influenced obedience to authority.